Hi, everybody. Thank you for choosing me after lunch. I know it's tough to eat quickly. I'm really excited to be here. This is technically the biggest talk I've ever given because of all of these people tuning in, which is awesome. I think it's so cool and generous that Figma does allow people to stream from anywhere, so that's really great. So my name is Jessica Hische. I'm a lettering artist and author based here in the Bay. So I live up in Berkeley. My studio's in Oakland. I will mention this, I'm having an all-day open studio on tomorrow on Friday if you feel like popping by. Link in bio. I do all sorts of work for all sorts of clients. I work in film, I work on books, this is some of the lettering work that I do, all custom. So lettering artists are people who draw letters, where calligraphers are people who write letters. That's the distinction if you ever have to explain it to someone. I do a lot of classic book covers, which are so fun because people are very particular about what they want to see in a classic book cover. This is a series I did with Penguin, another big classic book cover series. I've also had the pleasure of doing some title design for film, like Moonrise Kingdom for Wes Anderson, and recently, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. On top of that, I write and illustrate children's books, so these are the ones that are out, and I have a new one that's coming out in October, which I must say is available for pre-order. So my publisher would be very mad at me if I did not explain that to you. And then if that wasn't enough, I own 2 brick and mortar stores over in the East Bay. One is called JH&F, and it's below my studio. And please come and say hi tomorrow. I'm going to have my printing presses running, so you'll be able to do letterpress printing or Rezo printing if you pop by. So the talk that I'm giving today is called Found in the Details. So it's not about the other stuff, it's more about the logo work that I do. And I never really set out to be like a proper brand designer because most brand designers have to build empires below them in order to actually execute all of the stuff that is necessary for a brand. But I've really focused on doing brand refresh work because it allows me to still stay an individual creator and not have to become a manager of many creatives, because I really do like to keep my hands in the process itself. So if you're unfamiliar with what that means, like a refresh is very different than a rebrand. I was able to refresh MailChimp many moons ago, back in 2013, and they had a logo that they had been using since the start, that it was very scrappy, and the designers loved it, but they felt like they needed to glow it up a little bit and make it more usable across the brand. And then Collins, who you might have heard from earlier, they actually did a big rebrand for MailChimp and solved a bunch of problems for MailChimp that my refresh hadn't solved. They were trying to unite their mascot together with the logo type, and I love how it turned out, so people always think that I have like grumpy feelings about it, and I do not. So I really, really love this kind of work. I think it's really easy as designers for us to forget how specialized the skills that we acquire in our life are. And all you have to do is start explaining what a font is to some random normie, and then they're like, oh my God, that's crazy. And so I feel like this work, for me, I love it because I've always had utility as a big part of what drives me. I really want to feel useful. People ask me all the time, why don't you make a pillow series and make a whole brand, and you should be at this and you should be at that? And I'm like, it's because no one's asked me to do it. But if somebody comes to me and is like, can we pay you to make a live, laugh, love pillow? I'm like, filling a need. I will absolutely do that, But I really love this kind of work because I get to use my very, very specialized skills, and then also I get to collaborate with all kinds of teams, which is one of the most fun things about it. And the way that I work, I'll explain my process a bit later, I have this really sort of sliding scale way of working together so that I can collaborate at every stage of the process. Sometimes people bring me on really early, and I get to be involved in, sort of the strategy conversations and things like that. And sometimes I get brought in as the last-minute fixer just to smooth all the curves and make it look better. So Scott Thomas gave a talk a while back. He's a branding guy. He did the original Obama campaign. And he had this really wonderful periodic table of branding. And I loved it so much because it really explains what people in brand do. Because it's so much more than just making the logo. People think that they can hire you to make a logo and somehow the logo informs the whole system, and that's not really how it works. And if you do that, that's the #1 way to make a logo that immediately gets killed when you hire a proper branding studio. And so, there's all these different stages, and honestly, all of that stuff is done by teams of smart people. which is wonderful, whether that's a branding studio, an ad agency, a product and comm team, internal teams of all sorts. And then my specialty is really this upper right corner, and I love it. I love being involved in strategy and things like that, but the last thing I want to do is like a 5-day brand workshop in which I like make people write down answers to questions that I don't care about. So I'm happy that there are geniuses that do that, and then I get these incredible creative briefs that come out of those workshops, and then I can do my thing that I love to do. So when does a refresh make sense? So refreshes are really great when you're trying to correct legibility, accessibility. There's lots of people talking about accessibility at the conference. And then also just drafting issues that just didn't get resolved because of the person that did it the first time might not have been the most skilled, or actually sometimes it happens just because the technology has evolved so much, so that things that were drafted in the 90s have a 90s feel, because that's what the software was capable of doing in the 90s versus what you can do now. Showing a maturation of the company is a big one, like when you're going from that sort of scrappy startup stage to something that's a bit more like robust, like maybe that's a time to do a refresh. And then also when you're trying to blend existing assets that have really worked for everybody with a new brand direction, that's a good time for it. So I was able to work with Fender on the Squire logo, which was like a massive dream come true. I got to go down to the Fender offices and like walk through all their archives and things, and that was really great. And when they hired me, they had been working with this logo for a while that they called a Fender spaghetti logo. And they wanted to update Squire, and one of the first things they thought about doing was, let's make it match the Fender spaghetti logo, because this is what we're trying to use as our sort of primary logo for the brand moving forward. I gave it like a little zhuzh. So they have this Fender logo in their archives somewhere, and I was like, I'm just gonna do this for gratis, like in case you want to future use this. And they were like, yeah, sometime. So if it ever rolls out, I'll be like super stoked, but it's just sitting in their archives right now. So our earlier rounds of exploration both sort of looked at the current existing, like the one that was the most recent logo, but then also sort of making it blend with this Fender spaghetti logo. And one of the reasons why I wanted to also refresh Fender, because I was like, you can't put a logo that it has sort of drafting issues next to a newer logo that doesn't, because they'll play off each other in weird ways. And as we sort of progressed and moved forward, we ended up with sort of like these 3 directions that it could take, and then ultimately landed on something that was quite close to what this original source material was. And one of the issues that they have, that a lot of companies have, is that the logo itself had just sort of degraded over time, which is weird to think about with like digital files. But as you could imagine, like somebody somewhere down the line, instead of using like the real EPS file, takes a JPEG and then auto traces it, and then that becomes the master file that everybody's using. And it's just like, so common for this to happen, and then nobody knows where the original one is lost because somebody left the company 10 years ago and they had the database or whatever. And so a lot of the work that I feel like I end up doing is what I feel it's sort of like archaeological logo work, where we're looking at things that have existed and trying to get back to the core of it. It's sort of like looking at the original blueprints of a house, and after it's been through a lot of renovations, and going like, how do we get what the architect was originally trying to do and make that happen? With a rebrand, a time that's really good for is when there's a company pivot or a significant change in the offerings of a company, which happens a lot. Like sometimes the team is awesome, there's so much momentum, but like the thing that you're specifically working on like doesn't work out for whatever reason, and it might be a good time for a rebrand when that happens. Another time is when you're trying to aggressively target a new audience, or when you never actually had a really well-articulated voice. So when I worked on guitar.com, Guitar Magazine and Guitar.com were merging into one thing, and they decided to use this logo as the sort of source material. And the magazine and the website were kind of like boomer material, and they really wanted to bring it into a more like Gen Z space while not alienating the original customer base. So that's sort of always the goal with a refresh, is like, how do we do it in a way that people won't get mad at us that already use the thing? And in this case, we made it feel much younger with color and things like that, but it went through a much broader exploration before we sort of landed back at the beginning. So as I'm doing all this stuff, one of the things that we think about is like, what is brand equity and what what equity do we have, and what do we want to keep versus what do we want to throw away? Because I feel like it's sort of like when someone comes in for a makeover, and like a really good person that's doing a makeover will look at you and be like, here's your strengths, here's the things that can get updated. They don't immediately like make you look like a different person. They have to find the things that are amazing that are already there and really hold on to those. And so with logos, there's a lot of different factors: the style, the weight, the width. And then with the mark, or the like the logo that goes alongside the logo type, the concept and content is one thing for sure, but then also the illustration style and the containing shape has like a massive impact on whether or not you can recognize something. But color is one of the top ones, so I'll talk about that too. So when I think about like brand equity in logos, like what does that mean? Like one of the things that you can do is just literally like jot down all the things that make up the logo. Like with the New York Magazine logo done by Milton Glaser, it has these really unique N and Y forms. It's got these long swashes with teardrop terminals. It's got elegant all caps, italic serif, like all these things make up the equity of this brand. And you know that a brand has strong equity if you sort of like blur it and you can still recognize it. So everyone with glasses here, you have a superpower called take your glasses off. And that is how you can perceive the world and understand the strength of the brand equity around you. Everyone else has to sort of go cross-eyed a little bit. And then like color, though, is one of the top things that really brands can really rest on in terms of their equity. So we're going to do a little guessing game of color brand equity. This one's an easy one, though. I will tell you, like the screen display is like a little bit different than my laptop, even though I used all the hex values as they were supposed to be. So, but a clue is, we're all here. We're having a good time. Who can take a guess about what this is? It's Figma. What's the thing you love to hate that you spend all your day in that's super useful? Slack. Yes, that's right. And then, what's the one that started as this and is now this? Facebook. Yes, Facebook and Meta, correct. I would have a little spicy take that Meta doesn't totally own that blue yet. Might have a little time for that to sink in. But at the same time, like, who owns blue? It's so tough. I actually feel like there was a shit ton of brand equity in that navy, but I understand why they moved away from it. But what is the brand that owns just one color? Ooh, actually, you guys, I love this. Coca-Cola, though Target does really own that color. I can do that. That's a good, we should have a poll. I love the Coca-Cola logo because this gets brought up with me, with clients all the time, and people reference it, and they're like, I want something timeless, like the Coca-Cola logo. And I'm like, what makes this logo timeless? And I have a slide that says just that I'm ahead of my curve on, so allow me to apologize for that. But I love, the thing that's so wonderful about this is it's so recognizable that you can write like anything, any set of words in this, and you can recognize it right away. And it's also so recognizable that if you are a logo designer and you work in script, undoubtedly someone in a meeting is going to go, it can't look like the Coca-Cola logo. And so I did this logo for an energy company in New Zealand, and we had many don't make it look like the Coca-Cola logo conversations. Though when they approached me initially for the project, that's exactly what they said. So what makes a logo timeless? I love thinking about this because I look at the Coca-Cola logo and nothing about it says, this is timeless. And so the main thing is it remains in continual use for a very long time. Like, that's what makes anything timeless, like, really. And how do you guarantee that? One, be a successful company. So that's a way to have a timeless logo. Do that. Two, have a logo designed by a famous person. And I'm not putting myself in this category. I'm talking like Paul Rand, maybe like a Paula Scher, or something where people will come out in pitchforks, like if you remove the logo from the brand system. And so that's one way to guarantee it, because nobody wants to piss off the famous designers. So there we go. Avoid gimmicky design choices in too trendy styles. This is a big one. I feel like you can see a lot of work that are logos that feel quite student-y when people get a little too trendy. One of the things that people come to me for all the time is like making ligatures all over the place. Like they're like, this is great, but can we merge the letters together in random places that don't have a conceptual base? And I'm like, okay. And I tried to make one that I didn't like, and I was like, actually, I kind of like that one. So, but to me, this is just trying too hard, And people ask for this all the time, like, yep, got it. You guys want a ligature? It makes sense. I don't know if you guys remember this trend. I feel like I've got some friends in the room that remember this quite clearly. Little cuts on everything. You guys remember that? There was a moment when every company had to make little slices on all the type. And if you're like a knife company, that 1,000% makes sense, but like everybody was like, what would make this logo better? Slicing little parts off of it. The other thing that's really funny is people choose fonts based on what they're named. And so this is a font called Neotech, and it's by Seb Lester, who's a calligrapher. And I had used it for the cover of The Circle by Dave Eggers, which is about a tech company. And I told him about it because I was like, hey, look, I'm using your font. And he was like, you don't know how many people just Google tech font and then use it for their tech company. And it's absolutely true. So if you're a type designer, like SEO is absolutely everything. You just name it after the thing that you hope to see it on eventually. Like you can be like, Wilco poster font. And then like Wilco will be like, how about that? We should use that font. The other thing that is tough if you're looking to make a timeless logo is using a font that is cheap or free, because nothing guarantees that your logo will be like in a sea of similar logos than using a font that is readily available to everyone. And so while I'm not encouraging you to like only do bespoke commission stuff or only pay for fonts that are like $4,000, it does guarantee that there's not going to be a company using your font in a legal way. So Lobster was just absolutely everywhere for a minute. And we're sort of in this stage now. I love this font. This is Degular by a friend of mine who has a type foundry called Ono Type Co. But I feel like every logo of the last 5 years is like extreme thicks and thins, digital ink traps, la la la. And that's really, I think it's fun. But I'm really glad that all this to say, like, be adventurous with the typography that you use. Don't use this as like a shamey thing that you shouldn't do that, because otherwise we just end up with every company being this. And this slide was making the rounds a couple years ago, where every fashion brand was sort of sans-serifying themselves, and people were very sad and angry at it. Some of them, they've done a good job with it, and some of them, it's like, womp womp. When you want to, again, like this is about making timeless design, sweating the details is really important, because attention to detail really does create lasting design. When you think about logos or just brand assets in general, if there's anything wrong with it, just anything that you can critique, it's going to get thrown out when some company comes in and tries to do a refresh. So you really do have to spend the time making sure that absolutely everything is locked down. Because it really, like, putting in that extra effort really does matter. And it doesn't just matter for, like, the company. It matters for you personally. It matters for how people perceive the brand. We're all designers in this room. And I absolutely endorse, like, buying books because you like the cover or buying wine because you like the label. And the thing is, if people care about design, it means they care about the content, right? So, like, having good design shows people, it allows people to trust that the journey that they're about to go on is actually going to be like a wonderful, good, worthwhile journey. So that's why it's not a bad thing to judge things based entirely on the design. So to give you a little peek into my process, so this is a lot of words on a slide, so we'll go line by line. So first and foremost is like learning the client goals and understanding their intention. And this varies so wildly depending on who I'm working with. As a for instance, I was able to rebrand Jenny's ice cream. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Jenny's. So good. Has anyone had Supermoon? That one is like so fucking next level. Can't even tell you. But they had a bunch of goals because it had like this extremely long descender that made it impossible to typeset with and all kinds of things. But one of their main goals was don't make it look like it says penis. And I was like, I listen, I'm here, I'm responding to your feedback. And so somewhere down the line, someone took that apostrophe and put it over the I, and they thought that was a great idea. And I was like, let's not do that anymore. Now it doesn't say that. Phil's Coffee, Bay Area, whoop whoop. Everybody have their mint mojito iced coffee recently? Phil's I love, because Phil's has a vibe. So like if you are a Phil's person, you have a vibe about you as well. It has sort of like the the like chaotic energy friend that comes into a party and is like, what are we doing next? You know, and you're like, I'm not ready for this. And so as they were refreshing it, they were like, we need to keep the like weird chaos uncle vibes that it has. But also, it's really hard to do for signage. There's gradients. There's all these complex curves that the metal people have to cut around. Let's like make that better. And so, like trying to maintain that sort of weird, chaotic energy is definitely tricky as you're doing a refresh because you don't want to like, you know, slick it up too much. But I feel like they were really stoked, and I think we still captured the weirdsies of it. Next is discuss a game plan for the complete brand identity. And this is really important because I'm a logo designer, and if I don't talk to them about what is happening next, what are they going to do with the logo, what's the game plan for the team that's going to work with it, the first thing that's going to happen is a team is going to just absolutely eradicate whatever work that I do, because nobody wants to inherit someone else's work, especially when they're working on a refresh. So typically, if people are trying to hire me to do a logo first without engaging another brand team or without having an internal brand team or something like that, I make sure that they have someone in place that I can have discussions with and we can work collaboratively, just so that they feel like they have a say in the process and that they can influence that and it can be a part of their greater brand work. Next is evaluating the existing design and deciding what's worth keeping. You know, we talked about brand equity, but also like people have these logos, and what I love is like a lot of times there's a logo and the CEO is like obsessed with the logo. The CEO has the logo as like a tattoo. They cut it out like 8 feet wide in the office, you know, like whatever. And this was the case with Retail Me Not. So I was working with a web company that was redoing their site, and they were like, we need to redo the logo, but we can't convince the CEO that he wants to redo the logo. Can you show him what you would do? And I was like, so you're paying me to point out the weird features of your face that you can never unsee? Sounds great. And so so this was really great. I put together this deck that sort of walked through all the things that I was going to fix, you know, like talking about smoothing curves. A lot of it was just drafting issues. But then there's a lot of like typographic stuff that I was noticing. Like one of the things that lettering artists deal with a lot is that while we're not calligraphers, we're very informed by calligraphy and physical tools. And this is something to think about too, just as a designer who considers yourself unfamiliar with typography or like whatever, you're not like a nerd about it. We as people are incredible pattern recognizers because it's like a survival mechanism. It's why you can like look into a forest and be like, that feels unsafe when you see something weird. And so people of all stripes, no matter what your training is, can look at a logo and go, that feels unsafe when you see something that defies a normal pattern. And so in this case, making the strokes consistent, you know, I was trying to let the pen that drew this inform all of the letter forms. So when something feels like the strokes are inconsistent, it feels like it's drawn with different tools, and that can create these moments that you get really hung up on, and you're like, this feels weird, and I don't know why. And it's because all of the letter forms are sort of chaotically drawn in different formats and ways with different stroke directions and whatever. So we try and make sure that the consistency is there. More elegant terminals is a huge thing. One of the big requests that I get from people is to make things feel less like a font. And the way that strokes start and end is one of the primo ways to do that. So if you think about script fonts especially, they have these really long exit strokes and long entrance strokes because they're meant to touch each other. And so when you're working on a script typeface, a lot of times if you just shorten those and make them feel a bit more elegant, you end up with something that feels more bespoke. And then people love to make things feel really like round and soft, but there's parts of the letter forms that you should not do that on, like these internal parts, because you want it to feel like it's been printed on a really nice piece of paper, not that someone spilled a coffee over it and that the ink has bled all over the page. And this is my favorite thing because I work with engineering teams sometimes, I work with all kinds of people, and flippin' engineers love drawing little circles and stripes all over everything to make sure everything's lining up to a perfect grid. And having consistency is important, but one of the things as a type designer and like person who draws type is you break consistency quite a bit because optical, like how it looks optically is very different sometimes if you follow it perfectly. So for instance with that is with stroke angles, the longer a stroke is and the further it ascends past the X height, the more you have to lean it back because if you don't, it looks like it's falling forward. So it's an optical correction that you have to do in order to make sure that it actually does look consistent in the end. So if you ever want to like be very judgy about logos, this is like a little handbook that I show people that's just like all the questions that I ask, all the things that I walk through. And it starts with big picture stuff like making sure it's not accidentally racist and all kinds of stuff. And then it gets into like the more fine detail things down the line. Like does it look like a penis? So, we should always ask ourselves that question. I taught in a university just a couple of times. Like, I can't be pinned down, so I haven't done it very much. But one of the things that I did in one of these illustration classes that I taught is I assigned people to be like the critique ruiner for specific stuff. So I was like, you're the person that thinks everything's sexist. You're the person that thinks everything looks like a hot dog, like whatever. And so then they would go through and have to like wear this hat of being like the dork in the meeting that just can't let the thing go. And it was great. Everybody was able to bulletproof their designs in really different ways. So creating a scope based on goals, collaborating with budget, and also beginning broad and narrowing as we go. So different clients have different needs. Like with Carrot, I had to do a really broad exploration, so we tried a lot of different styles. And these aligned with different brand directions that we were presenting for like an overall look. But then with Southern Living, I was working with Jim Parkinson's original logo, who's a total legend. Like he drew like the early Rolling Stones logo and things like that. But it just had a really masculine hand to it, and it was also drawn in the 90s and just felt 90s. And so we went through all these explorations, sort of smoothing curves, trying different ways to do the G, trying different like thicknesses and thins and serifs, and ultimately like this is what I would call like a very close-in exploration. Discussing alternative versions and next steps. So sometimes I have to make a small scale logo for a company or do a lot of different stacked versions depending on how many sub-brands that they have. So for Chatbooks, they wanted this like hero logo that was going to be on totes and signage and all that kind of stuff, but they also were printing books and they needed something small that was going to work on the spine. So when you see them side by side, they look totally different, but when you see them together, they look the same. And when you're designing something for a smaller scale, typically you want to have less contrast between the thicks and thins, more generous white space, sometimes a higher X height, and you sort of start smoothing out a lot of those details that you would love to see when it's big, but they just disappear when it's small. And lastly, be a resource for the brand team moving forward that both like guarantees that your work is going to still have a life, but then also that you can still use your specialized skills to really like make sure the brand system gets to be as good as it can be. So why does attention to detail matter to me personally? First and foremost, I'm the kind of person that can look at two different versions of Helvetica and be like, there's a bad version and a good version, and I feel strongly about that. The bottom Neue Haus Grotesk is the good version, just so everyone's aware. There's many bad versions of Helvetica. There's no Helvetica is created equal. And I think if you're kind of that kind of person, you love this kind of work. I also, I've made a metaphor before that I'm like, people are like, don't you go throughout the world and see all this bad design and it makes you absolutely crazy? And I'm like, no, because I'm like Cyclops from the X-Men, where most of the time I'm wearing my glasses that keep my powers at bay. But if someone comes to me and is like, look at that logo, I'm just like, zing, and then I can do it. It's great. And it's like, if you don't have those glasses, you would be driven absolutely crazy. So I'm very grateful for my, keep it in check glasses. But one of the main reasons, too, is I want to not be embarrassed about my work in 5 years. I think a lot of us, you get this really nice period of time that you don't hate your work as you get older because your skill set is just so much better. When you're first starting out, your curve of growth is just like a hockey stick going straight up. So everything that you did even 3 months ago, you absolutely hate. And the further you are in your career, the less that happens. But you really have to pay so much attention to the work that you're doing and really give 100% all the time if you do want your work to last for you in your mind in terms of how you perceive it against your, the greater scope of your portfolio. And also selfishly, I want my work to last. I want people to use the work that I'm making for a long time. I'm primarily a digital creator, and all of us that work digitally, the thing is, it can be really ephemeral. If Dropbox just died, that'd be the end for me. I would just go into the woods because all my work would be gone forever because I'm not that good at backing it up other than my Dropbox, very bad. But I just really want to make sure that the things that I make have a long enough life. It would be great, and I think all of us want that for our work. And then lastly, flow. I spoke recently at a conference, and a bunch of people were talking about AI before I went on stage, and how AI is so great. It's going to automate all these things, and we're going to be able to work so efficiently, and then we'll be able to just like live our lives. And I asked the crowd, I was like, who here wants to spend all their time ideating and doing high-level thinking and absolutely zero time doing production? And no hands went up in the crowd. Because a lot of us, and I think even people that are really like high-level thought leaders, we need time to just get into a flow mode, and it's really difficult to do that when you're doing extremely cerebral stuff. And I think that we sort of celebrate that end of the work so much, like the sort of design with a capital D, design needs a seat at the table, designers are innovators, whatever. And we do that while also sort of quashing the fact that craftsmanship is not only important to the design, but important to like the human experience. And so I was at a different conference. I was on stage right after a friend of mine who showed a piece of his work from early in his career. This is from one of my kids' books. And in his piece, he had drawn all these little tiny blades of grass and described it as being torture. And I came on stage immediately after and was like, the 3 days that I drew these hundreds of books were the best days of my life, Like, I was just like, one person's torture is another person's favorite activity on the planet. And so I think as people that are design leaders shaping the future that we're in, it's important to remember that not to yuck people's yums, that things that don't matter to you matter a great deal to other people, and that we all need to be spending a lot more time actually just like physically creating stuff in order to not have to spend all of our money going to therapy. It's very important. So yeah, like I'll leave you with just these two thoughts, is that tools should augment your process and not automate your favorite parts. This isn't like a Luddite talk. This isn't me talking about like how we should not be building these things, that we should not be trying to like move the needle forward and do parts of the process that have been a great pain in the butt in the past for people, but that really stay in touch with what about you do you love, and how do you do more of the thing that you love to do, rather than like erasing that through automation. And lastly, do the part you love and do it exceptionally. That's all we have to do here. That's what we're here to do. So thank you so much.